From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Where there are real violations, they will be resolved fairly. Actually, these official complaints on Election Day total 118 cases.
In Russia, tens of thousands take to the streets alleging electoral fraud in the largest protest in a decade. We'll speak with The Guardian's Moscow correspondent. Well, former. Luke Harding was expelled from Russia earlier this year. His new book is Mafia State, How One Reporter Became an Enemy of the Brutal New Russia. Then to the U.S., where former Senator and New Jersey Governor John Corzine testifies for the second time before Congress over the fall of MF Global, one of the largest bankruptcies in U.S. corporate history.
Like all of you, I am devastated by the enormous impact on many people's lives resulting from the events surrounding the MF Global bankruptcy. Of course, my distress and sadness pale in comparison to the losses and hardships that customers, farmers and ranchers and others, employees and investors have suffered.
Where did the money go? We'll speak with former investment banker turned journalist Nomi Prinz. And Congress is on the verge of authorizing the military to jail anyone without charge or trial if the government deems them a terrorist suspect. We'll talk to Chris Anders of the ACLU. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Republican-controlled House has passed a bill that would extend a Social Security payroll tax cut, but add on a series of unrelated provisions opposed by Democrats. In addition to the tax cut, the bill also calls for speeding up the construction of the proposed Keystone XL pipeline that would move tar sands oil from Canada to Texas. The vote comes in defiance of a veto threat from President Obama, who said he'll reject any effort to link the tax cut to unrelated proposals. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid says the bill is dead on arrival in the Senate. Attorney General Eric Holder's vowing to ensure the protection of voting rights in states that have recently enacted controversial laws that critics say target low-income voters and people of color. In a speech Tuesday, Holder said the Justice Department will aggressively review the laws most enacted by Republicans in the name of fighting fraud. 8 states have enacted laws this year requiring voters to present state-issued photo ID. In his remarks, Holder cited the concerns of the Georgia Congressman and civil rights leader John Lewis.
In my travels across this country, I've heard a consistent drumbeat of concern from many Americans who, often for the first time in their lives, now have reason to believe that we are failing to live up to one of our nation's most noble and essential ideals. As Congressman John Lewis described it in a speech on the House floor this summer, the voting rights that he worked throughout his life and nearly gave his life to ensure are, and again I quote, under attack by a deliberate and systematic attempt to prevent millions of elderly voters, young voters, students, and minority and low-income voters from exercising their constitutional right to engage in the democratic progress, unquote.
This past weekend in New York, thousands of people marched for voting rights, marching from Koch Industries to the United Nations. At least 32 people were killed in Syria Tuesday in the latest violence of the uprising against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The deaths come one day after the United Nations estimated the toll since March has surpassed 5,000. At the United Nations, Deputy U.S. Ambassador Rosemary DiCarlo criticized the Security Council for failing to take action against the Assad regime.
My colleagues here are in touch with the Arab League. We're very much looking forward to the results of the meetings that are going to happen in a few days, and we will be solidly behind them in support of many of the things that they and we have called for, in particular an immediate end to all the violence, deployment of international human rights monitors, including the Commission of Inquiry, and freedom of movement for journalists as well.
Iran is rejecting a U.S. demand for the return of a U.S. drone that crashed near its eastern border earlier this month. The U.S. has acknowledged the drone was used as part of a CIA spy program that has sent many drones into Iran to purportedly monitor suspected nuclear sites. An Iranian foreign ministry spokesperson said rather than seeking the drone's return, President Obama should apologize.
Mr. Obama has requested for the spy plane to be returned to the U.S. It seems that he has forgotten that our airspace was violated. A spying operation was conducted and international law has been violated.
As the U.S. seeks the return of the drone from Iran, another U.S. drone has crashed at an airport in the island nation of Seychelles. U.S. officials say the aircraft was unarmed and used to monitor piracy off the East African coast. The United Nations has issued a record $1.5 billion appeal for the humanitarian crisis in Somalia. On Tuesday, the UN humanitarian coordinator for Somalia, Mark Bowden, said the famine that has killed tens of thousands of people could worsen over the next year.
We are literally on a knife edge this year, and if we don't sustain our operations, I think it could be, we could see serious problems develop, the areas that have recovered, perhaps moving back into into famine-like conditions, and also increasing displacement.
Unknown vandals have set fire to a mosque in Jerusalem amidst a wave of increasing attacks by Jewish settlers. In addition to the arson, the mosque was defaced with anti-Arab slurs and the price tag slogan associated with the settler campaign to vandalize Palestinian property. The incident comes hours after a group of settlers broke into an Israeli army base in the West Bank and destroyed property in an apparent protest against the dismantling of unauthorized outposts erected beyond the massive Jewish settlement blocks that already carve up Palestinian land. An Israeli army spokesperson said the settlers had been violent.
Over the night, some 50 riders infiltrated into a military base in Judea and Samaria, the Ephraim Regional Brigade, where they acted in a very violent manner, throwing tires, laying nails on the roads, and hurling rocks at some soldiers and commanders. The IDF sees this incident in a very severe manner. We are working currently to cooperate with other security organizations in the country in order to investigate this matter.
Palestinians have accused the Israeli government of failing to take action against the settler attacks. At the United Nations, Palestinian Ambassador Riyad Mansour called for the Security Council to weigh in on the vandalism and the Israeli government's ongoing expansion of settlements.
We want the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility with regard to all these violations, especially the violation of the continuation of the illegal activities of Israel in the settlement front. And we will see what will be the result of this consultation to collectively decide on what is possible. Our desire is obvious. We want the most effective reaction from the Security Council.
The latest wave of settler attacks has accompanied the Palestinian effort for statehood recognition at the United Nations. On Tuesday, the Palestinian flag was raised for the first time at the headquarters of the UN cultural agency UNESCO in France. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas hailed the milestone.
وأن تكون بشارة وفاتحة انضمام دولة فلسطين إلى المنظمات الدولية.
We hope this will bode well for Palestine becoming a member of other international institutions. We hope that this will be of good auspices. We know the noble ambitions of UNESCO in terms of peace, education, culture, and science. And our admission today is a tremendous source of pride for us.
New evidence has emerged. News International executive James Murdoch was warned of the phone hacking at his family's media empire earlier than he's admitted to. On Tuesday, a British parliamentary inquiry released a June 2008 email chain from then News of the World editor Colin Myler that Murdoch received. In the email to Murdoch, Myler described the hacking revelations as a, quote, nightmare scenario. Murdoch replied to the email within 3 minutes, but now claims he did not read the full email chain outlining the situation. In Honduras, dozens of journalists clash with soldiers outside the presidential palace in Tegucigalpa Tuesday in a protest against a wave of killings targeting Honduran reporters. Soldiers threw tear gas at the journalists as they tried to enter the palace. Around 24 journalists have been killed in Honduras since 2007, most of them since the June 2009 ouster of then-President Manuel Zelaya.
We came to ask for justice for 24 journalists that have been killed since 2003. We've read the stories of many colleagues who have been killed with clear signs of summary execution, which have been denounced by some human rights organizations.
Honduran journalist Wendy Funes. A coalition of environmental groups has filed a last-minute attempt to block the first auction of offshore drilling leases since the BP oil spill of 2010. The federal government is scheduled to hold a sale today of leases covering over 20 million acres of the Texas coast. In their complaint, the groups Oceana, Defenders of Wildlife, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the Center for Biological Diversity say the federal government has failed to take sufficient steps to prevent a repeat of the BP disaster. Former Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky appeared in court Tuesday to waive a preliminary hearing on his ongoing child sex abuse case. Sandusky faces 52 criminal counts for alleged sexual abuse of 10 boys. An attorney for one of the alleged victims said Sandusky was trying to avoid his accusers.
He doesn't want to give these boys an opportunity to be heard directly because his continued effort to try and accuse these boys of not being honest would have been completely shattered. Frankly, should have been shattered long ago. But for those who might want to think that maybe there's some semblance, some little crack of credibility, that would have been lost altogether.
And the National Transportation Safety Board is urging a nationwide ban on cell phone use while driving. On Tuesday, the NTSB became the first federal agency to call for such a measure. The board estimates cell phone use contributed to more than 3,000 highway deaths last year. That's more than 8 deaths per day. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.